long, and yeah, we'll make it happen. So
sounds great.
okay.
I'm officially recording, folks. So if you don't want your cameras on the recording, you can uncamera yourself now.
My screen, is it working?
Yes, you're good.
Great. Okay, so hi everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. I've known about Civic Tech for a while, but it is my first time attending, and I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to share some of my thoughts. And what brings me joy is also my zucchini plants, which have started to flower, but we can talk about that later. So yeah, I've titled this Art as an Approach to City Building, and I'm a bit, nervous because y'all are tech aficionados and I'm a very analog low tech person, but I think we can talk. So I think we can work together. So yeah, this is my info and I'll flash it at the screen at the end. I'll just show you what I'm going to talk about tonight. Little intro of who I am, an approach to how I see art and map making, and then I'm going to go through some campaigns I've done and some strategizing I've done to make those campaigns have the most impact. So yeah, I'm an illustrator. I'm an author of 2 books. One of them is A Colorful History Toronto, which features all the historic sites owned by the city and featuring kind of how they run as community centers, and several pages and features Casa Loma and the brickworks and lots of other more obscure historic sites. I'm a writer. I write with a lens of geography, and the great thing about geography is there's a geography to anything, including pizza. So this might be the highlight of my career so far, is writing for the Globe about Fresca Pizza at Spadina in college, my favorite pizza place. I know I'm not alone. And I also today just published, I live on Toronto Island, and during COVID, it's been really interesting to be on the island without any visitors. The ferry is only running to residents. So I wrote some reflections about that. There's issues of equity and access. I'm grateful to be experiencing this place so quiet, but it's also really off to not have anyone here. So please come back soon. And then I also make maps. So one of my clients has been the City of Toronto, and these are maps that are part of these guidebooks, which you can find in community centers all over the city. And it's about kind of exploring the history and ecologies and cultures outside of the downtown core. And I just want to credit Marlena Zuber, who's she used to live in Toronto, but she now lives in Eastern Ontario, but she deeply inspired my map making, and shout out to Marlena. So I want to talk to you about cartography because it says a lot about the way I approach arts and communications. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Mercator or Mercator map projection. Many of us, got to know the world with this projection, but we also know that it's very flawed because this is the projection that was kind of created for European merchants traveling between Europe and North America, and it distorts the rest of the world hugely because you can't put a round thing onto a flat surface without distorting it. And just to remind everyone, the actual size of Greenland is tiny. I know we know this, but to just see it again, like there's Africa, there's Greenland, like this is a massive distortion. But it has changed the way we perceive the world. The Northern Hemisphere is much larger than the Southern Hemisphere with all the power and inequities that comes with. And with Google Maps, I think, as a geographer, it's, touching that everyone has access to maps all the time. And I think there's a lot more spatial literacy than there would have been even 30 years ago when less people had access to maps. But I just want to acknowledge how deeply this image of Toronto's geography informs the way we think about the land here. Like this is a road map. It's about a network to get us from A to B as fast as possible. But it's to scale and it's objective and scientific, but it's not really the way we experience the land. So I often think about this analogy of the moon, and there's a full moon and it's like so big and so beautiful and it's like taking up the whole sky, and you whip out your smartphone and you try and take a picture of it, and then it's like super teeny tiny. And this is like, the phone is kind of an objective tool of measurement. If you were to take, the area of the sky and the moon that you're seeing, it's actually quite small, but the moon is very important to us and it's meaningful, and we like actually enlarge it in our perception as we experience the world. So that's kind of the analogy I use when I attempt to make maps, how we experience the world versus its objective scale. So this is an old map that made the rounds a couple of months ago again, but it's how Torontonians see North America. And, you know, Toronto's giant, the rest of Canada is tiny, Vancouver's big, and then the United States is basically Florida and California and New York, and everything else is, you know, mashed together. So it's a humorous take, but, you know, maps can be a creative way of expressing how we actually experience the world. So this is something I try to do with my illustrations. It's something I call a cartogram. So it is spatially, like, everything is it's not to scale, but everything is accurate in a relational sense. So this is Scarborough. The bluffs are there, you have the guilds, and you have Scarborough Arts, and you have Scarborough Town Center and the bridge over the Rouge River. But it's not to scale, it's exaggerated, and this is kind of how I imagine we all experience Scarborough when we think about it in an abstract way, trying to put it to paper. And then this is another map I did, which was with Art Starts. It was a project called Cartography 17. And this was in collaboration with Lindsay Lickers, who's an Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee artist. And we wanted to map Toronto using Indigenous ways of knowing. So we pivoted from kind of the way we know Toronto in that Google map, but we added, instead of borders, there are the wampum belts, which you referenced in the intro. So the dish with one spoon on the bottom and the two-row wampum belt on top, which is about our commitments and relations to each other and the more human world. So, you know, the rivers don't really care that Toronto stops at Steeles. We live in a region that is all connected, and what matters more is our relationship with each other. And the rivers are big, and on the top there, Lindsay added kind of the Haudenosaunee sky world. So, you know, adding that spiritual dimension to our cartography, because that's a part of the way we navigate the world. So, you know, compare this to the other map of Toronto, and they're both accurate in their own ways. Anyways, so here's my my leap into my next section, so bear with me. Art, for me, is, you know, how we perceive the world. It's a channel to communicate that, not necessarily objective or to scale, but, you know, emotionally to scale. And how we perceive the world is vital to the way we communicate. And communications are vital to city building campaigns. So that's how I use art as city building. I kind of want to pivot from how we experience the world, less from an objective sense, but more about like an experiential perception sense. So the next section, I'm going to share with you some campaigns I've done, and I've been grateful that a lot of them have gone viral in the Toronto sense, and my most recent project went viral globally, but this is not a how to go viral thing. I think you can Google that and you can figure it out, but I want to kind of, I think that there's utility in sharing what are some strategies I've had to really tighten up my messaging and thinking about who my audience is and how to make a message resonate, especially since a lot of my projects have been about, you know, improving the world and city building and, you know, about loving Toronto and wanting to contribute to it. So there's this old adage, know your audience. But I think when you're kind of designing a campaign, it's more about choosing your audience. And I find that that is really helpful to just narrow down how people are communicating, and you want to resonate with like a very like the internet is very interesting because you have these very specific channels and very specific ways that people are communicating on those channels. So you can like design something to resonate with those ways that people are communicating. So I'll make it less abstract and show you a few projects. So my All the Libraries project, so I visited and illustrated every branch of Toronto Public Library for a variety of reasons. One is that I love Toronto and I wanted kind of a way to explore it and systematically explore it. There are 100 branches spread throughout the city, by the way. Here's a hard to see map. And another was because I love Toronto Public Library. And at the time, it was like just before the 2014 election, and libraries were in the news a lot because of the first Ford's cuts to libraries, and I wanted to create a project that was about the great qualities of libraries and why we love libraries and all that. But I also wanted to launch my art career. So it was like, you know, I wanted to create something that resonated with people and was also kind of a strategy to, you know, establish myself. So both are true. And my intended audience was Metro Morning. And I was so inspired by Matt Galloway. His like thoughtful, expansive, nuanced approach to understanding this big, complicated metropolis. I was really inspired by his kind of view of Toronto, and I kind of designed a project and the narrative of the project, imagining that I would be talking about it on Metro Morning. And that just helped kind of me to like, you know, funnel it into a, you know, how much information is needed and like what kind of messages would resonate. And fortunately, I did get to go on Metro Morning to talk about it, which was a dream come true. And I was super grateful to do that. And then it led to lots of other press, which is great. And it led to a book that was published and a lot of people being inspired and a lot of love and outpour for the library just being established in and of itself. And there are still threats for the libraries to be cut, but you know, campaigns like this, I think, help remind people how important they are. So my next project, the Social Distance Machine, this was conceived at the beginning of COVID and the dead of lockdown when we were kind of still figuring out what it meant to be safe. And we had this idea of 2 meters that we needed between each other to navigate the city safely while preventing the spread of COVID. But it became obvious to me right away how little space there was of the pedestrian realm. Like Toronto sidewalks are so skinny that there's no room to navigate safely around people. So this project was part of the Toronto Public Space Committee, which I'm also part of. We tried to conceive of a way of, you know, bringing attention to this deficit of public space. So in the video, this is not me, by the way. A lot of people confuse me for the person wearing the social distance machine. This is my friend Bobby, and I filmed it and kind of directed it. So the film shows Bobby just like showing how impossible it is to navigate Toronto's existing public realm, pedestrian public realm, in giving 2 meters space to people, and really showing that the only safe space is to walk in the middle of the street, and not everyone feels safe or comfortable doing that. People with mobility devices. Anyways, and then one of the major critiques I got for this was, you know, you only really need to have 2 meters in one direction, because if you're like beside a building, like you only need 2 meters on one side of you, and you know, this was kind of inaccurate in that way. And to them, I say, I'm an artist, not a scientist. And with the campaign I leaned into humor, absurdity, and, you know, exaggeration to make a point. And I think that that's okay, as long as you're not taking yourself too seriously. So for this one, my intended audience was 6buzz TV, which is a very good Instagram page. For those of you who don't follow them, I encourage it. I kind of see it as like, it's like the voice of the GTA in many ways. They post about all current events, and people, you know, if you read the comments, you can really get the pulse of what people are thinking in the region. But you know, it's also kind of absurd and in your face. And so I looked to TikTok, where the youth are spending their time, and I wanted to make. So to get onto 6buzz, I wanted to make a video that was like kind of inspired by the TikTok aesthetic. And so you can see in these screenshots I got that there's like these little pop-up video style word bubbles, and you can see that I directly stole that aesthetic. I also had to keep it under a minute, short and funny. And that was, you know, the way I kind of zeroed in on how to get this messaging and how to make it be as amplified as possible. And I got onto 6buzz, but only for like 20 minutes, because I used MC Hammer's Can't Touch This, and it was copyright infringement, and they took it down. So here's a screenshot for posterity. It worked. But then, of course, you know, as the media is, it was spread all over other media, breakfast television, City TV Global, even Russian television got it, RT International. So it went viral globally because a lot of us are dealing with the same things in cities around the world. And that campaign, Streets for People TO, got to admit, the thing that the city did was a bit half-assed. And, you know, this active TO, I appreciate the effort, but it's kind of like piecemeal spread throughout the city. Toronto often doesn't think about a network of spaces. They do open the streets on the weekend, which is great, but, you know, there's more to do. And I also want to acknowledge, like, when I created that campaign, I was coming from a very specific perspective. And Jay Pitter wrote this amazing essay for Zur magazine, which I really recommend to everyone, about forgotten densities, which she's termed to kind of, so when we think about density, often that privileges a, you know, white middle class central city dweller, but there's all kinds of densities, like in Toronto community housing in the suburbs, apartment towers, shelters. And when, you know, I was talking about something that made me feel safe, but we have to acknowledge that not everyone feels safe, even if they close down the streets. And what are ways that we can advance like an equitable urban agenda that doesn't forget everyone's experiences. So, you know, I put something out there and I took the critique and I learned from it. And I think that's an important part about this too. So yeah, my expertise depends on admitting when I don't know something. That's something that I often say to myself. And I don't, you know, expertise is kind of, I put it in quotes, but I think it's like, if you're enthusiastic about something and think about it a lot, that's your expertise. But I also proceed humbly. And then finally, sharing my development proposal prank from a few years back. This was more of a subvertising, ad busting, like putting something in the wild and hoping that people see it. But this was the old development proposal sign, which is like really doesn't invite a lot of participation from people. It's written in really technical language and the public meeting is never posted. It's always, information will be posted once the meeting is scheduled. And since this, the city of Toronto has improved their signage about development proposals, but they're still kind of saying this development is happening, and not really inviting a lot of participation for most people. So this was in 2016, and there was a lot of conversations about hyperdensity. Keesmaat was still the chief planner. She wanted to put a pause on Yonge Street developments. And I wanted to take a cue from like this ad busting. So here's like people put up, you know, took down the Harry Potter poster and put up their own to show like the lack of people of color being showcased in mainstream media, and like taking the aesthetic of the official aesthetic of something, but then kind of pivoting from that to make a point. So pivoting from this terrible development proposal sign, which really doesn't invite any participation at all, I created a series of increasingly absurd development proposal signs, suggesting that there would be developments on our most beloved landmarks in Toronto, including off the side of Casa Loma, on top of the podium of City Hall, on the side of the CN Tower, and 2 towers beside the Sky Dome, noting that the Sky Dome roof would remain closed during construction. And we planted one in front of Old City Hall, a 90-story tower, and Old City Hall was going to be converted into a parking garage. And a lot of people thought it was real, which was amazing. And I'm sorry if I tricked you, but it was a great way to make a point about, you know, the development process that has kind of gotten out of hand. And I also wrote a lot of articles saying that I'm not against development. It just doesn't seem like people are being listened to. There's not affordable housing. There's not any give back to the community. It just seemed like an extractive process where people are not being invited into the process. So I was clear on that. But so anyways, they, you know, it kind of went viral, tweet from Keesmaat, that was great. And it was a really fun time because I didn't reveal my identity until later. It was me and my friend Mike who did it, and we kind of were like secret, and we had secret graffiti street artist names. And then Alex from the architecture critic for the Globe he ripped me apart on Twitter because he said, you know, it's a clever campaign, but the problem isn't too little public consultation, it's too much. So even though I tried to cover all my bases, I, learned something from putting this out there. And it was during that time when the conversation about the yellow belt really expanded. And I'd like to think that my campaign contributed to that a bit. So the yellow belt, for those who don't know, all the areas in yellow in this map of the city of Toronto are deemed neighborhoods. And they basically, you can't build anything other than a house there. So most of the city's land is, you can't build any density, and homeowners have a lot of power. So as a result, all the density is pushed into the red areas, the avenues and the cores, and you get this effect. It's kind of like, think of a squishy ball and you squeeze it all and like one side pops out. Like, we're not allowing density to, spread evenly throughout the city. So, I admit I was wrong. I pointed to some of the wrong things, but I'm glad that I contributed to the conversation. And in subsequent articles, I was able to learn from that and incorporate that into, what I was trying to say. So that's my presentation. Thank you so much. Here's my info. That's my Twitter and Instagram handle. And let me know if you have any questions. And please send me a message if you don't want to ask anything now. Thank you so much.
Oh man, that was brilliant. Let's virtual applause and
yay, thank you.
Oof, mind blown. Who wants to kick us off with a question? Wow, it's so fascinating. So many lessons we can apply to this community too. Anyone want to kick us off? Yay, John. Go ahead. Floor is yours.
I'm just going to allude to a controversy from 17 years ago, which kind of brought it home to me that when people talk about quality of life in this city, we tend to talk about quality of life for people with lower melanin levels than the average, of whom I'll admit to being one. For those of you who weren't here at the time, there was a tremendous dust up over Toronto City Centre Airport, which was for which a great many people advocated for closing on the grounds that it was affecting the quality of life of a mostly very wealthy and highly developed neighborhood along the waterfront, while ignoring the effect that air travel had on Pearson, which was and is surrounded by neighborhoods with people who are much less wealthy and have more melanin than the people downtown. And I said this on multiple occasions, in multiple forums, and in multiple circumstances, and was not very popular because of it. So I have it kind of sensitized me to the whole issue of quality of life issues and the way planning and similar things are done in Toronto, and that and being called a traitor for advocating density in a place somebody didn't want more density, so that affected things too. So I think I will leave it at that and ask for your comment.
Yeah, I mean, the conversation is always evolving, and yeah, that's a very big thing, because I think a lot of people acknowledge the importance of there being an international airport as part of this region, but so many people in that flight path are of lower income and are racialized, and I think it's a broader question of like equity and wealth distribution and access, and like transcending environmental racism. I don't have the answers, but I think it's important that we continue to ask them. And if it wasn't the time then perhaps it's the time now for that conversation.
Thank you both. Mark?
Hi, everybody, and hi, Daniel. Thanks so much for your talk. It was really cool. I'm wondering, how it is that you knew your audience, and how you determined which audience you wanted to talk to, and how knowing your audience specialized your projects or directed.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's it's kind of like which audience am I attracted to or interested in. But I think what I wanted to say with that method is kind of like, it doesn't matter which audience you choose, but like if you're making something for everyone, I think you miss a lot of people. But if you kind of define a group that you're trying to talk to, like more specialization creates greater resonance. That's kind of a thing that I've been playing with. So I think it's like, with a lot of the campaigns, I was interested in it, reaching a lot of people. So SixBuzz with its 1.8 million followers is like a natural place to go, and it's a very alive internet community right now. So and I'm interested in communications and the way we talk, and how the community interacts with each other at SixBuzz. So I don't know, just follow your nose. And I think it's important to be, to not be too much of a generalist. Like when you're thinking about a communications campaign, that you're like speaking to specific people, and then you'll find that once you get to that audience, like the domino effect will occur and other people will join the conversation. So
Cool.
do you have any follow-up questions, or did that answer anything?
No, that definitely did. Yeah, I think I was being a generalist on a topic, and I'm going to narrow in. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Mark.
That's great. Dawn?
Hi, thanks for your presentation. This is actually hopefully a really short follow-up to Mark's question, so it was well timed. I'm sort of thinking about, have you ever had a case where you discovered like you had like an unanticipated audience, or like ways that sort of like it got taken up or had a resonance with people you didn't anticipate, and whether that informed like maybe how you think about city making or how you like developed your kind of more recent projects?
Yeah, well, I think I kind of, with the social distance machine, I put it out there, with a light humorous edge, and then like the conversation about equity and COVID was really profound. And I found myself quite humbled by that. And also, you put something out there and people are going to take it up in all these ways. And it's just important to know that like that was, I felt that day when the social distance machine was out in the world, that my soul was like cracked into a million pieces, and I didn't have any control of like a message that I was trying to give out. And I think that's okay. And when you put something out there, like people are going to take it up and attach it to their own agenda. But I think just going back to like knowing your audience and keeping your message simple, and like, not being too worried, and being humble when, legitimate critique is lobbed at you. So I think that everything is a process, as you said about civic tech, and discourse is a process, and rhetoric is a process, and we don't do ourselves any service by like doubling down on our views, especially if you put something out there. So I'm having trouble finding another example right now. I'm sure I'll come up with them as soon as the meeting is over. But I just say like, put it out there and, listen once it's out there.
Mm-hmm. Super interesting. Let's just take two more, Lee and Josh, to close us off.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump the line.
Oh, it's okay.
I'm really glad you brought up the yellow belt. It's sort of an interesting phenomenon. These houses are really changing the communities. The children who live in there can't afford to live there, so spreading out. And they're really fundamentally changing the way we've done our community services, especially the schools. I went to Malvern Collegiate, and our primary sports rival was Central Tech, a booming school of almost like 3,000 students. And now it's at barely over 1,000 right now. Do you think any of your future art projects will start talking about how communities are fundamentally changing just to protect these people in these houses? But there's so much more, because people's retirement hands, we have old grandmas in there, we can't move out, people's retirements. I don't know how we could change the system, but make it fair.
Yeah, I think like awareness that there is a problem is a big step, and still it's kind of within the Twitterati of urbanist Toronto Twitter that knows that this is a problem. So I think like we have more work to do to tell people that this is the issue and that they can, call their counselors, and that's how politics works in the city, hopefully. But yeah, I think one of the ironies of, you look into the city plan and it's, the neighborhoods are protected to preserve their stability. And I think many writers have written about this, but it's actually doing quite the opposite. It's destabilizing the neighborhoods because the population is getting lost and the schools aren't supported, as you said. So it's doing the opposite effect. And it just is about retaining property value. And that's, ludicrous and not the city that I'm sure most of us want to live in. So I would be supportive of collaborating on a Yellow Belt awareness project. And that with COVID and everything, there's like priorities are all wacky right now, but I think that this is a persistent issue that will be part of the future of the city. So stay in touch.
Fascinating. Okay, Josh. Do you want me to?
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'll just paraphrase. Daniel, I was interested in your development proposal sign project, and wondered if any of the conversation that came up or any other projects you've had looked at what I perceive as a serious problem, that's the OMB getting in the way of city plans.
Yeah, I mean, that's another one. And I think it's called the LPAT now, or they changed the name, but it's kind of the same thing. Yeah. Emily is agreeing. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, this is all, I think the function of power is often to make things more complicated than they need to be. And it keeps people who are just average citizens away from the processes, and us as, innovators and creative people and people into tech and communications. I think that is a great prospect for, I think there's a lot, like, we can get caught up in discourse and rhetoric being the only thing, but it is a big part of the way we navigate the world. So I haven't done anything yet, but I encourage you to give it a shot and try and crack the nut and, spread an education about why things happen the way they are. I know that, Toronto is the city of condo bashing, and like, condos are fine and they're where people live, and there are reasons why they, are built to be more like investment properties than actual places for people to live. And that's not the residents' fault. That's like a systemic issue. And there's many ways that I think we could expose that. So good question. Good idea.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Daniel. This is really just incredible. We're gonna wrap up, but like, Daniel, can you stay on the line? Like, if folks have questions after, like, yeah, okay, so we'll just wrap up, and then if folks do want to continue chatting with you, we'll just encourage people to stay in this Zoom chat. That would be great. Okay, so let me just let me stop recording for one. You can